Ever since the continuous bloom caster was installed at Port Waratah in mid-1987, the works' steelmaking capacity of only 1.7 megatons a year has prevented the caster from reaching its full potential. But today, that changed when Works General Manager Rob Chenery switched on the new machinery at the BOS, much to the delight of a Japanese contingent which has been helping with installation. For 100 years, this is how the quality of a batch of steel was checked. At best uncomfortable and possibly even dangerous. Probes were inserted manually into the furnace to measure temperature and take a sample. During this time, the oxygen feed to the molten metal had to be shut off, meaning a costly waste of time as the furnace was rotated. Now, probes are inserted mechanically during the steelmaking process and readings taken without interruption. Engineers say this will bring the time taken to produce each 200-tonne batch down from 55 to 47 minutes, a major 17% improvement in productivity to 2 million tonnes of steel a year. But equally important is that production is now more suited to the pace of continuous bloom casting.
The process of matching when a heat of steel is finished to when the caster is ready to take that heat is very important to the total both quality and production requirements of this plant.
The Japanese flag was flying at the steelworks today, acknowledging Nippon Steel, the company which supplied this new technology. And BHP took the opportunity at the same time to install new anti-pollution devices. These take the form of hoods to collect fumes during the time the furnace is being filled with scrap and molten iron, and an associated filtration system. All up, the improvements have cost BHP $28 million.
Oh yes, we'll get it back in terms of quality and production and overall better environment.
Paul Marquette was racing the clock today as he underwent intensive physiotherapy in a bid to prove his fitness by tomorrow night. X-rays have revealed a small fracture in his left elbow, but the tough as teak tackling machine has decided to simply ignore the pain. He may still choose to take on the Eels and live with the risk of simply making matters worse.
There's a slight chance, if I get a bad knock on it, but it's a fairly slim chance. It's pretty well damaged as it is. The tendons might pull the fracture back into place and it should be right if they pull back into place.
Marquette's attitude is typical of the Knights' determination to bounce back after last week's loss to Penrith. It was the first time the youngster had played in a losing first-grade Winfield Cup side, and he'd like it to be his last. The critics have written off Newcastle as semi-final contenders, but the players are having none of it.
We'll beat Parramatta this weekend, then we only got to win one out of the next two and we'll make the semis, so it's pretty high, yeah. We'll make the semis.
The business community turned out in force for the opening of Newcastle's Business and Consumer Affairs Office. In days gone by, it would have in fact been 4 separate departments: cooperative societies, consumer affairs, industrial development and decentralisation, and the Corporate Affairs Commission. Now they're all under one roof.
One of our main objectives is to slash red tape, and we start first in our own agencies. We have a chain of command that's very responsive. We're not doing things the way they used to be done 50 or 100 years ago.
The Newcastle Chamber of Commerce has welcomed the move, saying it will let its members literally get back to business.
What this means to everybody in the region is that instead of having to travel to Sydney or to make extensive phone calls to Sydney, all services now are available in Newcastle, all under one roof.
The Knights paid the penalty early in the match for being offside on more than one occasion, and Scott Martin coolly booted 2 goals to give Parramatta a 4-0 lead. Peter Sterling was in everything and the Eels went close. Referee Weeks had had enough of the Knights' infringements, and Peter Johnston was sent to the bin for 5, and Parra made full use of the missing link to score. Behind 8-0 and looking shot, Jeff Doyle opened up. Parramatta could have been well in front at half-time if Mahon was on target after David Boyd was also sin-binned by Weeks. Brett Kenny cut loose and Joey Fulmer was there to clean up. But it was a different Knights outfit in the second half, and Ashley Gordon posted the first points for the Red and Blues from a penalty. And then Fulmer and Hagan set up Robbie McCormick to score, and it was 8-all. Michael Hagan then put the Knights in front. Slam and Sam played the ball awkwardly and Scott Mahon made no mistake from the penalty. Parra started to throw it around and Langford burst through. And the little genius stretched the Eels' lead. Back came the Knights with Goodwin committing an error of judgment on Fulmer. With only about 6 minutes remaining, Michael Hagan potted his second one-pointer for the Knights and Newcastle hit the front. The crowd went berserk as Sterling equalised. Coach Alan McMahon was beside himself at any error, and with 5 seconds remaining, the Knights gave away a penalty that could have cost them the competition point so vital to their semi-hopes. In the minor semi-final, it was a battle between third-place Sinbads in the grey and Bogart's Esprit, who finished the minor round in 4th spot. Sinbads opened well through their shooters Bronwyn Stone and Megan Asquith, but halfway during the first term, Bogart's hit back and at the first change led by a point. It was neck and neck in the second quarter, and at half-time it couldn't have been closer at 20 goals apiece. Teresa Richards and Kylie Walker started to find their range for Bogart's and led by 2 at the last change. From there on, Bogart's dominated and good defence helped them spring into attack on numerous occasions, and they finally tipped Sinbads out of this year's premiership 40 goals to 34. In the major semi-final, the experienced cricketers' Arms were expected to dominate their match against Western Suburbs Novos, but someone forgot to tell the youngsters they were the underdogs. Right from the outset, and led by some brilliant shooting from Louise Mansfield and Melissa Wellham, West Novos got on top and an upset was on the cards. Kerry Page was trying to lift her team, but time and again defence combined with good movement of the ball helped Novos launch attacking raids. A feature of the Novos play was their quick passing around the circle, and they were able to hang on to their advantage, set up early to defeat cricketers and go straight into this year's grand final. The final score, Novos 33, cricketers 31.
Some areas of erosion are obvious. 20 years of runoff through this gully has turned it into a 3-metre chasm. But in other pasture and cropped farming lands, soil losses of 1 and 2 millimetres per year are hardly noticed. Yet in the long run, the problem can be just as great.
I would think very few farmers are aware, and it takes about a generation for something obvious to start to occur.
But the nuclear age has given scientists an accurate gauge to measure even the tiniest soil movements within days. Weapons testing in Central Australia in the 50s and 60s left radioactive cesium-137 in the stratosphere. It spread throughout the continent and eventually settled, bonding to soil to a depth of 150 millimetres. Scientists from Newcastle University, Soil Conservation and the Lucas Heights Nuclear Facility are measuring for cesium-137 in local soils. If there are no traces, at least 150 millimetres of topsoil has been eroded by wind or rain.
Wherever the soil goes, the cesium-137 goes with it because it adheres very strongly to the soil particles. So that where soils have lost their cesium-137, they will have also lost their topsoil as well.
In a strange twist, nuclear fallout can now be seen as an aid in protecting the environment.
The program in which I work is the environmental science program, where we are trying to do something for the environment, and that means trying to do something for our society.
14 sites in each state will be tested in the 3-year campaign, giving the soil conservation and farmers accurate information on danger areas to protect.
Long dismissed as childish entertainment, comics have in recent years undergone something of a metamorphosis. Gone are the cartoon images, and in their place, the intricate work that has won them serious recognition in the art world.
These days, as you've seen, you get painted style of work, whether it be water paints, oil paints, collage. A lot of the comics these days use cinematography to explain a story, and a lot of filmmakers actually use comic stories to develop their own plot lines.
So the people that are drawing comics these days, they are recognised and respected as artists in their own right?
They are. A lot of the comic conferences in America now have the artists giving lectures, travelling around America, displaying their artworks. There are quite a few museums in America solely devoted to comic strip art.
To collectors like Dietmar Liederwasch, the recognition is long overdue. Dietmar believes his collection represents a large and largely ignored chunk of modern culture, combined with a rare insight into our history.
A lot of the comics from 40 years, even 30 years ago, have all been destroyed, which is unfortunate because I do consider them to be an intrinsic part of Australian history. Some of the artists you've seen there, their work was probably lost forever.
That's why you've become such a fanatical collector?
I wouldn't say fanatical, but I do try as hard as I can to pick up old comics and preserve them as well as possible.
And he's not alone. Collectors from around the world will pay amazing prices to get their hands on rare pieces like this original Phantom comic. But for the purist, the big money being offered is an even bigger headache.
The unfortunate thing is that it makes it difficult to get a complete collection because of the value that people put on it in monetary terms. I prefer to have them worth nothing at all and at least complete the collections and have them preserved.
all the world this morning, Christine and Peter Feros looked like just another young couple who overnight had become the proud parents of a bouncing baby boy. But this birth was different. When she dropped off to sleep last night, Christine still had 2 weeks of pregnancy to go. But a few hours later, about 2:30, she was awakened by a niggling pain. By 3, when those pains were sharp and frequent, Peter decided to ring the hospital. As Christine's water hadn't broken, they were unconcerned, suggesting there was plenty of time to get to hospital. Then suddenly, it all started happening.
Just as he hung up from the hospital, I said, Peter, quick, my water's broken. As soon as the water broke, the baby's head was out. Peter rushed in and got a nappy.
As soon as I saw the head, I grabbed the phone and asked for advice.
On night shift at ambulance control was Bob Dunn. He took Peter's desperate call for help.
Ambulance.
Can you send an ambulance to 91 Mitchell Street, please?
What suburb, sir?
Stockton.
What's the problem?
The baby's out. The head's out. Can you help me?
There'll be a car around there straight away. Thanks for your call. Ambulance.
Oh, g'day, mate. I just rang up about the child.
Oh, yes.
He's on the floor.
Right. Is anyone there with apart from you?
No, the only one.
Okay, the baby has presented itself.
Yeah, he's crying.
The baby is breathing.
Is he breathing, Chris? He's starting to stop.
Yeah, just sort of lift him up by the feet gently, firm grip, clear the airway, and the baby should start...
I think it's all right.
Yeah, his baby should start breathing all of itself.
It'll breathe by itself, Chris.
Are we getting a baby cry out of him at all?
He just had one.
Good, okay.
Was that normal?
Oh, yes, for sure. That's just the presentation, of course. Leave the baby on mother's tummy and just keep it nice and calm.
Within minutes, ambulance officers arrived at the Feros house, quickly assuming control from a relieved Peter.
They were really good, weren't they, Peter?
Yeah, they had to give him oxygen straight away because just a small amount of oxygen, wasn't much, because he was going all right. And if it wasn't for those blokes there with their professionalism, I think we would have been in dire straits.
We would have had him in the car, wouldn't we?
Transported to Western Suburbs Maternity Unit, Tony was thoroughly checked and pronounced a safe and happy 7-pound 20-inch baby brother for little Michael.
It's a miracle. Miracle.
Yeah.
We're blessed that he's healthy and okay.
Six cars that will take part in the rally sprint tested the track and conditions today, and if the practice session is any indication, some brilliant times will be run. John Long will campaign a V8 Commodore, which has the capacity to upset some of the more fancied runners. Steve Cox will also give his V8 Commodore a thorough test on the tight roads in the Watikins. Michael Bell's 2-litre Escort is well suited to the 7.8 kilometre circuit and should be up with a leader come day's end. Keith Brooks from Gosford will pilot a GTI Suzuki Swift, and the nimble machine will love the tightness of the course. One of the favourites will be Justin Barham's Toyota Sprinter, and he had as navigator today an Ironman with a little apprehension, Guy Andrews.
I've been looking forward to doing this a long time. I think I might get a bit nervous once he fires it up though.
After throwing the Sprinter in all directions, it was a somewhat relieved but ecstatic Andrews that finally drew breath. For the YE driver and current New South Wales rally champion in his class, Barham will be trying to keep tight lines.
You've got to keep the car flowing, and some of the other cars with fast line acceleration are going to be hard to keep up with, but if we can keep it flowing through the bends quite smoothly, we'll be right behind them.
But the man they all must beat is the defending champion Brett Middleton from Sydney. He leads the series, but because he will have to drop points gained in a previous round, he will start 2 points behind the leader Mark Swartzell. However, the track should suit him.
We won the event last year, and it was very well suited to our car because it's got so much horsepower and there's a lot of pretty long straights, so you can get some good speed up. But it's just important to keep it on the road and put the result in. First is not necessary, but just getting the points is the important thing.
Barry Jones flew into Rutherford late this afternoon. Despite losing his ministerial portfolio of science and technology earlier this year, he still has a high profile in the science field. Mr Jones is in Maitland for the Finished Medical Research Week. The 1990s is the decade of the brain. Mr Jones says Australians need to learn more about their grey matter. In the 1960s, Barry Jones was the quiz king of BP Pickerbox. Today he starred again as fill-in compere of the midday show. So how does it feel to be a media personality?
It's 30 years this year since I began on Pickerbox. So, and that seems a long time ago. So well, first of all, I'm a bit dubious as to whether I am a media superstar like Ray Martin, but I'm used to having had a fair degree of attention from the media.
This 8-month-old New Zealand seal pup was found on the beach at Anna Bay on Sunday, and a well-meaning member of the public took her home. But according to the National Parks and Wildlife Service, seals often find their way onto beaches simply to rest. And while the sight of a pup lying on a beach might be worrying, there is, in most cases, no cause for concern. It says that moving seals can cause more harm than good, and there is a $10,000 fine for those found interfering with native wildlife. Rangers ask anyone finding a seal on the beach to look carefully to see if it is sick, injured or in danger. If it looks in good health, it should be left alone to rest and to return to the sea of its own accord. If it looks unwell, the National Parks and Wildlife Service should be called to assess the situation. This little creature was deemed healthy by a vet and released into the open sea this afternoon. After taking a moment to recover her sea legs, she happily disappeared under the water's surface.
It took a while for it to sink in, but now these Australians are finally free, and at their hotel in Jordan today, the five relaxed for the first time in nearly a month. Attaché Fenella Walter brought out with her a message of hope for the relatives of the 160 Australians left behind.
In a way, they're resigned to whatever might happen next, and in other ways, they're quite cheerful. Still maintaining their lifestyle, still doing things as much as it's possible for them to do.
During this time of crisis in Baghdad, the Australians grew close and very dependent on each other. All of them now are leaving the Middle East for a while, but to a one praying that their mates still in there will soon follow. Good news too for some Americans already thought to have been positioned around military targets in Baghdad. In fact, they had been rounded up by their own diplomatic staff and now relatively safe at the embassy. Iraq was also considering its position again today. Saddam Hussein's now familiar spokesman even mentioned Australia, saying the world should stand against Australians for cutting off our grain shipments to Baghdad. Iraq's foreign minister was talking too. He came here to Jordan, saying Saddam is ready to negotiate peace, but at the same time warned his country is ready for war.
It's going to be a bloody conflict, and America will lose, and America will be humiliated.
The Iraqi build-up of firepower is continuing in southern Kuwait. These Scud surface-to-air missiles have now been placed well within range of the Saudi capital and key military and oil installations. They can carry either explosive or chemical warheads.
The accuracy of the Scud is not particularly good, but if you're delivering a ton of mustard gas, then if you're 500 metres out one way or another, it doesn't really matter very much.
And closer to the border, patrolling warplanes are reporting a sudden increase in the number of encounters with Iraqi fighters.
We see them, we look on them, and they just turn back and go.
Also turning back, or not being allowed to offload crude, this Iraqi tanker. It follows assurances from Yemen that its ports won't be used to break any trade embargoes against Iraq. The exodus of refugees from the war zone grew to even greater numbers today, with as many as 20,000 people pouring into Jordan.